You know what's funny? Today, getting drunk feels completely normal. People raise glasses at weddings, laugh too loudly at parties, and argue over whether wine is better than beer. It feels modern, social, ordinary. But the moment alcohol starts changing someone's mind, you're looking at something much older than bars, bottles, or breweries. That feeling links the present to one of the strangest questions in human history. When did people first get drunk? Not when did they first make wine labels, or build taverns, or invent fancy cups. I mean the real beginning. The first time a human drank something fermented, felt the world tilt a little, and realized this was not ordinary food. Was it an accident? Was it hunger? Was it curiosity? Or was it part of a ritual long before cities even existed? And here's where things get tricky. Alcohol leaves behind a very confusing history. Fruit ferments naturally. Honey ferments. Grain can be brewed. But finding an ancient plant does not automatically prove intoxication. Archaeologists need residue, tools, repeated patterns, and context. One sticky pot means very little. One cup means almost nothing. But when you find grinding stones, brewing traces, special containers, and ceremonial settings together, the story starts becoming real. And once that story begins, it takes us far beyond parties. It takes us into caves, burials, villages, temples, and the oldest feasts humanity ever held. Before humans ever understood fermentation, nature was already doing it for free. Leave sweet fruit in the heat, and wild yeast starts feeding on the sugars. Leave honey mixed with water, and fermentation can begin. Even fallen fruit on the forest floor can become mildly alcoholic on its own. So in one sense, humans did not invent alcohol. The natural world did that first. Humans only noticed it, repeated it, and eventually got much better at controlling it. Now imagine early humans living close to the land, tasting whatever the environment offered. They already knew some foods could heal, some could poison, and some changed how the body felt. So it's not hard to picture somebody eating overripe fruit, feeling strangely warm or lightheaded, and remembering the experience. Animals sometimes get drunk this way too, which tells you the process itself is ancient. But we need to be careful here. A strange feeling after eating fermented fruit is not the same thing as a drinking culture. It does not prove planned intoxication. It only shows that the road toward alcohol may have started accidentally. And that matters, because the first human to get drunk probably did not know what was happening. They were not saying, "Let me have a relaxing evening." They were more likely confused, maybe amused, maybe uncomfortable, maybe fascinated. And once that experience was noticed, remembered, and repeated, a much bigger question opened up. When did humans stop merely stumbling into fermentation and start deliberately making it? So could the first drunken experience have happened by accident? Honestly, that is the most believable starting point. Picture a group of foragers collecting fruit, roots, and honey. Some gathered food sits a little too long. A container of mashed berries or diluted honey is forgotten for a day or two. The smell changes. The taste changes. Somebody tries it anyway. Maybe they laugh more than usual. Maybe they feel sleepy. Maybe they become unusually bold. The next time, they do not throw it away so quickly. That is how a mistake can become an experiment. And humans were excellent experimenters long before science had a name. If a plant soothed pain, people remembered. If smoke changed the mood of a camp, people remembered. If a strange liquid created a powerful feeling, they definitely remembered. Repetition is where accidents start becoming culture. Still, believable is not the same thing as proven. Prehistoric accidents rarely leave neat evidence. Liquids disappear. Containers rot. Camps move. Memories die with the people who had them. That gap between what probably happened and what can actually be tested is the heart of this mystery. I strongly suspect humans encountered natural alcohol very early, perhaps far earlier than any surviving archaeological evidence. But I cannot honestly point to one cave and say, that was the first drunken night in human history. So instead of inventing a first drinker, we follow the oldest evidence that survives. And surprisingly, some of the earliest clues do not come from a wild party. They come from the dead. One of the most surprising discoveries in this story comes from a time before full agriculture had properly taken over human life. In a cave in what is now Israel, archaeologists studying ancient Natufian burials found traces suggesting that people may have been making a kind of beer around 13,000 years ago. Let that sink in. That is older than pottery in many places, older than cities, and older than farming as most people imagine it. The evidence came from stone mortars and residues connected with cereals that seem to have been processed, mashed, and fermented. Now, researchers still debate details. Archaeology is rarely as simple as a headline. But if the interpretation is correct, it means people were producing a primitive beer-like drink for feasting or ritual long before beer became an everyday staple. And that changes how we think about early alcohol. It suggests that alcohol may not have begun as casual refreshment. It may have begun as something special, something communal, something tied to ceremony, memory, and the treatment of the dead. That makes sense when you think about human behavior. Funerals gather people. Rituals create emotion. Feasts display generosity and status. Fermented drink fits naturally into those moments because it changes feeling, lowers inhibition, and turns an ordinary meal into a shared experience. So one of the earliest strong clues we have points toward this idea. Humans may have started brewing not because they were bored, but because rituals demanded something memorable. And once people learned that lesson, alcohol was never going to stay small. If the cave evidence gives us an early and exciting possibility, another discovery gives us one of the clearest confirmed ancient drinks. In Jiahu, in ancient China, archaeologists found residues inside pottery vessels showing that people were making a fermented beverage about 9,000 years ago. And this was not simple grape wine. It appears to have been a mixed drink made from rice, honey, and fruit. In other words, some very ancient people were already blending ingredients in ways that look surprisingly sophisticated. That matters for two reasons. First, it proves deliberate fermentation. This was not random fruit rotting on the ground. This was prepared, stored, and consumed. Second, it shows that humans learned very early that different ingredients could create different results. Rice brings starch, honey brings sugar, fruit brings flavor and more sugar. Fermentation transforms all of that into a drink that is nutritional, symbolic, and intoxicating. And again, context matters. These were not just random household scraps. The vessels suggest repeated practice. That means knowledge. Somebody knew what to mix. Somebody knew when it was ready. Somebody likely knew who it was for. At that point, alcohol is no longer an accident. It is a technology. A soft, bubbling, invisible technology built from patience and observation. And once a community knows how to do that, the possibilities expand fast. Because fermentation does more than make people tipsy. It changes how food can be stored, celebrated, shared, and imagined. From there, alcohol begins moving into the center of human social life. So why did alcohol stick? Why didn't it remain one strange ritual experiment and then disappear? The answer is that fermentation was useful in several different ways at once. It could preserve calories. It could make certain foods and grains easier to consume in liquid form. It could create something festive from ordinary ingredients. And perhaps most importantly, it could change mood in a way that communities clearly found meaningful. Grains were especially important here. Once people began farming more seriously, cereals like barley and wheat gave them a repeatable base for brewing. Unlike wild fruit, grain can be harvested, stored, processed, and turned into predictable drink. That predictability is a huge step forward. It means you do not have to wait for nature to surprise you. You can produce intoxication on purpose. But I do not think early people loved alcohol only because it got them drunk. That is too simplistic. Fermented drinks also became part of hospitality, status, labor, ritual, and identity. Sharing drink builds trust. Hosting a feast shows power. Serving something special at a funeral or celebration gives emotion a physical form. A drink can say, "This moment matters." And once settled life expands, Production expands too. Brewing becomes more organized. Containers improve. Recipes spread. Some drinks become everyday. Others remain ceremonial. And others become symbols of wealth. So the question is no longer whether humans brewed. It is how deeply brewing reshaped early civilization. To see that clearly, we need to move into the world of the first cities, where beer stopped being a novelty and became part of life itself. In ancient Mesopotamia, beer was not just a drink, it was a system. As villages became cities, and cities became powerful states, beer moved into kitchens, temples, work sites, and households. Barley was abundant, labor was organized, and brewing became woven into everyday life. Ancient texts, images, and residues together show us a world where beer was familiar enough to be produced in quantity and important enough to be recorded. And this is where many people start imagining chaos, like the first cities were full of permanently drunken workers stumbling through the streets. That is probably not the right picture. Ancient beer was not always strong by modern standards, and it was consumed in different forms for different purposes. Some of it was likely nourishing, thick, and closer to liquid food than modern bottled beer. People drank it from jars, sometimes through straws, to avoid the floating grain and sediment. It could be part of labor rations, part of social life, or part of religious offerings. This tells us something important. Once alcohol enters a civilization, it rarely stays in one box. It becomes practical and symbolic at the same time. It can feed, reward, celebrate, and unify. But it also needs control, because intoxication is powerful. And whenever something is powerful, institutions step in. Temples, elites, households, and rulers all begin shaping who drinks, what they drink, and when. Beer had gone from an ancient experiment to an organized human habit. And south of Mesopotamia, another great civilization was doing something remarkably similar. Ancient Egypt also gives us a world soaked in brewing. Beer and bread were deeply connected, because both depended on grain and both sat close to the heart of daily life. Archaeologists have uncovered large-scale brewing sites, residues, tools, and artistic scenes that make one thing very clear. Egyptians were serious about fermented drink. Workers drank it. Households made it. Ritual life included it. And like in Mesopotamia, it was not just about getting drunk for fun. That does not mean drunkenness was unknown. Of course people could overdo it. Humans have always been human. But the larger historical picture is broader. Beer in Egypt could be nourishment, payment, hospitality, medicine, and offering. It helped turn grain into something shareable and culturally meaningful. It was part of the rhythm of life. What I find especially interesting is how ordinary alcohol starts looking once a civilization fully absorbs it. The mystery disappears for them. Nobody is asking, what is this strange fermented liquid? They are asking, who brewed it? How much is available? And what occasion is it for? That tells you how far the story has moved from the first accidental fermentations. By this stage, alcohol is normal enough to shape economics and ritual, yet special enough to appear in sacred and social settings. But beer is only one branch of the story, because once humans mastered fermentation, they did not stop at grain. They moved into fruit, and fruit gave rise to a drink that would eventually become a symbol of prestige, refinement, and power: wine. Wine changed the emotional image of alcohol. Beer often feels communal, practical, earthy. Wine enters history carrying status. Grapes require the right environment, careful handling, and eventually trade networks that can move a delicate product across long distances. As wine production expanded in places like the Caucasus, the Near East, Greece, and later Rome, alcohol took on another identity. It became luxury, ceremony, philosophy, and display. That does not mean beer vanished. Far from it. Different drinks lived different lives in different cultures. But wine sharpened the link between alcohol and class. Who could afford it? Who served it? In what kind of vessel? At what kind of meal? Suddenly, fermented drink is not just something people consume. It becomes something that communicates taste, rank, and belonging. And of course, it also becomes wrapped in storytelling. Gods of wine appear. Poets celebrate it. Moralists warn about it. Philosophers discuss moderation, while symposia build entire social rituals around drinking. That balance is very human. We love powerful things, and then we immediately start arguing about how powerful they should be allowed to become. By now, the original question has grown much larger than one first drunken person. Alcohol has spread across continents and cultures, taking on local meanings everywhere it goes. But one pattern keeps returning, whether in caves, early villages, cities, or classical societies. Humans keep using alcohol in moments that matter: burial, feasting, worship, hospitality, celebration. And that suggests getting drunk was never just about pleasure. It was also about belonging. The more alcohol spread, the more societies had to explain it. Why did this drink make people looser, louder, braver, or more foolish? Why did it seem to create joy in one setting and trouble in another? Ancient cultures answered those questions in moral, religious, and social ways. Some connected alcohol with the divine. Some treated it as a gift. Some treated it as a danger. Most did both at once. That tension makes perfect sense. Alcohol is socially powerful because it changes behavior. It can strengthen communal feeling, reduce fear, and turn a meal into a celebration. But it can also break order. That is why cultures build rules around it. Who may drink? When? How much? At what age? In what context? Those rules are not random. They are society trying to manage a substance that is both attractive and risky. And this is one reason I doubt the earliest drunken experiences were meaningless. Humans are meaning-making creatures. If a substance repeatedly changes consciousness, communities notice. They regulate it, ritualize it, celebrate it, and sometimes fear it. Over time, alcohol becomes tied to harvests, mourning, hospitality, medicine, masculinity, femininity, class, and religion. It becomes woven into identity itself. But before we answer the main question, we have to clear away a few myths. Because the internet loves simple historical stories, and the history of alcohol is anything but simple. One popular myth says, alcohol created civilization. That sounds dramatic, but it is too neat. Fermentation may have played an important role in feasting, farming, and social cohesion, but humans did not build cities because they wanted happy hour. Another myth says ancient people drank alcohol because water was always unsafe. That also oversimplifies the story. Water sources varied, and humans were not helpless idiots who only survived by staying slightly drunk all day. Fermented drinks could be useful, yes, but the full picture is more complicated. Another mistake is treating the oldest surviving evidence as the first moment anything happened. If we find a 9,000-year-old fermented drink, that does not prove nobody got drunk earlier. It only proves that this is one of the oldest traces that survived. And survival is a brutal filter. Liquids vanish, organic materials decay. Whole drinking traditions can disappear without leaving clear archaeological proof. So what can we say honestly? We can say humans probably encountered natural fermentation far earlier than our oldest confirmed residues. We can say that by the late Stone Age, people were almost certainly making fermented drinks deliberately in at least some places. We can say those drinks were tied to ritual, feasting, and community long before modern alcohol culture existed. And we can say that once agriculture and settled life expanded, brewing and drinking became major features of civilization. That careful answer may sound less dramatic than a myth, but it is actually more amazing. Because the real story is not one invention. It is thousands of years of experimentation, adaptation, and human desire. So when did humans first get drunk? Here is the honest answer. We do not know the exact first time, and we probably never will. Natural fermentation could have introduced alcohol to humans long before anyone recorded it, stored it, or left residue behind. Some early person may have eaten fermented fruit or tasted spoiled honey water tens of thousands of years ago and felt the first human buzz. That is possible, maybe even likely, but it is not something archaeology can date with confidence. What archaeology can tell us is this: by around 13,000 years ago, people may already have been brewing beer-like drink for ritual purposes. By around 9,000 years ago, we have clear evidence of deliberately fermented beverages made from rice, honey, and fruit. And in the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt, beer had become a normal and important part of life. Later, wine added status, trade, and new cultural meanings to the story. So the earliest direct evidence points deep into prehistory, while the broader cultural history shows that humans embraced alcohol long before modern society. And maybe that is the most revealing part of all. The oldest history of drunkenness is not mainly about reckless fun. It is about ritual, memory, labor, celebration, grief, and community. It is about humans discovering that certain drinks could do more than nourish the body. They could change the mind, reshape a gathering, and turn an ordinary moment into something unforgettable. So the first person to get drunk is lost to history. But the human fascination with intoxication, that story is ancient, global, and still very much alive.